This is an exclusive excerpt from the Stuph File program with Peter Anthony Holder.
Rocky Lang grew up the son of a mega film producer, so he knows a thing or two about growing up in Hollywood. And that's the book he has written. It's called Growing Up Hollywood, Tales from the Son of a Hollywood Mogul. And Rocky joins us on the line right now from Los Angeles. Hi, Rocky.
Hey, how are you? It's great to be back on the show with you. It's been a long time.
It's a pleasure having you back on the program with us. Last time in the old radio program that we did, we talked about your book about emergency rooms.
Yes, Confessions of Emergency Room Doctors. It was a lot of fun, a little crazy time, and a crazy book.
So as I mentioned in the introduction, you grew up the son of a Hollywood producer, Jennings Lang, who did such films as Earthquake, the Airport movies, and several others. So what made you at this point in your life decide, I have to write this book?
It really was the genesis of, came from a conversation with my daughters, who are now 23 and 19. And one day we were sitting around just the breakfast room, and my older daughter said to me, "Hey, Dad, did Grandpa really get shot in the balls?" And there was this pause, and I said, "Well, no, actually he didn't." And what they were referring to is a legendary Hollywood Babylon story about my father, who in the early 50s was having an affair with screen siren Joan Bennett, who was married to a wacky producer named Walter Wanger, who won some Academy Awards and did some pretty great films. And Bennett was not happy in her marriage, and my dad was not happy in his marriage. And the two of them started to have an affair, which actually was held in the apartment of a man named Jay Cantor, who was a junior agent at the then MCA agency in Beverly Hills. And my dad would use his apartment to have this tryst with Joan Bennett, the actress. And that was actually the apartment that was the genesis for the movie The Apartment by Billy Wilder and Jack Lemmon years later. So anyway, my dad took Joan off to a meeting for a television show. And when he returned with Joan to the agency parking lot, Wanger appeared out of the shadows and took a shot at his family jewels and missed. But as legend in Hollywood precedes truth, the story has been written as Jennings Lang was shot in the balls. And you can read it in all the Babylon books and whatnot. So what I did is I told the story to my children, and I told it through the eyes of a 13-year-old, which was me, the day that I found out that this happened. When I came to school, and I was 13 years old, and my best friend came running across the playground blacktop saying, "My mother said your father was shot in the balls. Hey, Lang, my mother said your father was shot in the balls." This was the first time I heard the story. Of course, the whole playground went silent, and I spent this entire day looking at the clock, wanting to get home to find out if this was true or not. And the questions that the kids asked me the whole day. So I kept running home, and there's this maid who worked for us who looked sort of like a Maytag washing machine with a head on it, big stocky woman. And I'm like, "Hey, Mary, was my dad shot in the balls?" And she said, "How the hell do I know if he was shot in the balls? I don't see your father's balls." And I ran up the stairs to my mother, and I said to my mom, "Mom," and my mom heard the question, and she says, "That's something you're going to have to ask your dad."
Wow.
And so then I had to wait for my dad to come home, and I'll leave the rest for the book. So anyway, I wrote this. Nikki said to me, "Dad, you should write this all down." And so I wrote this story down, and the Huffington Post picked it up, and I thought, you know what? I have a lot of really funny stories about growing up in Hollywood. Now, this event happened before I was born and happened before my mother married my father. It was a first marriage. And I continued to write these stories about growing up in this amazing, lifestyle where, Steven Spielberg was at our house all the time before he became the great Steven Spielberg. He was just a kid, and he was under contract to Universal. And there's stories about when I played tennis with Clint Eastwood and how I had peanuts with Jimmy Carter and this sort of whole crazy world of Hollywood growing up. And I ultimately became a director, a writer, and a producer myself doing movies, but not at the level of Hollywood and Beverly Hills in the 70s. And that is really where the book came from.
Now, some of the other stories you share, I mean, you've told your story on a story on your dad about, before he was married to your mom with his first wife. So let's talk about your mom, too. I understand that she slept with Ronald Reagan?
She did. She slept with Ronald Reagan, and I found out about that one night when I was a little bit older than 13. I was probably, I guess, maybe in my early 20s or late teens. And we were eating at a restaurant that was called Chasen's, which is a legendary Hollywood fare that has now since closed. And very elegant restaurant, and you could find all the mega stars of the old day, whether it was Bogart and Bacall or Gregory Peck, Walter Pidgeon, John Huston. I mean, these are people who always frequent, and Dean Martin was always there, Sammy Davis, Frank. I mean, it was an amazing restaurant that we would go to all the time. And another couple loved this restaurant, and that was Ronnie and Nancy. And so one night we were having dinner with my parents there. And Tommy Gallagher, who was the captain, captain waiter, came and said, "Oh, who's in the back? Ronnie and Nancy here." And this was just after he left the White House, and it was back to California. And my dad said, "You're lucky, Rock. Your mom could have married Reagan, and you wouldn't be eating dinner tonight." And I said, "What does that mean?" And so the story got revealed that after Reagan had divorced Jane Wyman, and he and my mom dated for a couple of years, and Ronnie asked my mom to get married. And she declined. She thought he was a very nice guy. He was, by the way, a Democrat there, very liberal, and president of the Screen Actors Guild. But she said no, and Nancy Davis, who was also an actress, had her eyes on him. And, it was a very, very strong, they obviously had a very strong marriage, and for many, many years. But the story that is within that book, which I will not reveal the end is that if you read the story about how my mother slept with Ronald Reagan, there is a term that Ronald Reagan gave to himself that will make you never think of him in the same light again. It is quite hysterical and very revealing.
Okay. Now, speaking of hysterical and revealing, in telling your story, should anybody within the Hollywood community be worried about what you're saying in your book? Have you told stories out of school, as the saying goes?
No, I don't. I never told stories out of school because that was not the intent of the book. I have actually changed the names of some people to protect them because the intention was not to do any harm or to hurt anybody. It was really my point of view on what had happened. There certainly are some stories, that have not been told. And I was right in the middle of very, very serious fights between Dustin Hoffman and Sidney Pollack during the making of Tootsie when I was directing a film about the making of Tootsie, and those stories had not been told. Certainly the story about my father has not been told in the way that I have told the truth and sort of set the record straight. There are other things along the way that have never been told because they just haven't been written about, and I witnessed them, and I felt that they were worthy ideas to be discussed and have fun with. But no, there's nobody in it who I think would be object to what I said. In fact, I got a wonderful phone call from Jay Cantor, who had the apartment my dad was in Jay's in his 80s, and he called me yesterday. He's very complimentary about the book, and it was wonderful to hear it from him because you never know how anybody's going to react when you use the name in a piece of writing.
Just the title itself, Growing Up Hollywood. When people think of Growing Up Hollywood, they usually either think of one or two extremes: an idyllic childhood where you have everything waiting for you hand and foot and everything is great and wonderful, or a childhood where you're neglected or are delinquent or are causing troubles. And there never seems to be stories about, somewhere in between.
I think that, it all comes down to parenting. My parents were self-made. My dad drove out here with $40 in his pocket and worked as a janitor at thrifty drugstores at a store, and he had to eat horse meat, before he sort of found his way. And my mom was a Depression kid and who became extremely successful in her own right, Monica Lewis, and had a big career at MGM. And so they certainly came from the school of hard knocks. And even though my dad did incredibly well in the business, and we lived in Beverly Hills, he and my mom always made sure that I understood what was really important in life, and it was just really content of people's characters and not the size of their bank accounts. And it was sort of drilled into me, and I witnessed it firsthand. We had, amazing people all over the house who were not only intellectual or incredibly wealthy and successful, but also struggling artists and, down there out former tennis players who played Wimbledon. And, it was a really very wonderful event. And we had these major parties too, which, I think I wanted to share with you. We had a party, I don't remember how old I was, it was in the early 70s. And it was for the Daniel Ellsberg Defense Fund after he had released the Pentagon Papers during the Vietnam War and was on trial for espionage, sort of like an Edward Snowden of the day. And there was a party for his defense. And I got up in the middle of the night. I was hungry, and I went down into the kitchen. And sitting around our kitchen table was Ringo Starr, John Lennon, Yoko Ono, and Barbara Streisand, and just sitting around the table. And I was like, "Oh my God, the Beatles!" And it was, I sort of went up to bed, and I don't think I slept that night. And the next morning, my mom said that Ringo and John and the group had smoked some weed, and they actually put the butts out in a Moreau sculpture, which is a very famous artist, thinking it was an ashtray. So that's sort of the world I sort of grew up in.
Well, I've got just about a minute left, less than a minute. I got to ask this question, and that is, you grew up in Hollywood. Do you think it was more fun or easier growing up in Hollywood when you grew up, or would it be more difficult or more fun today?
Well, I think that's a tough question because my experience was unique in that it was just my experience, and because I was so close to my parents, and the book in many ways is a love letter to my dad. My experience was a wonderful experience. I live a very sort of, middle class life now. I'm a writer, your kids in college and, trying to pay the bills and doing all of that. And so my life is very different and far away from that life. But I'm having fun now, and I had a hell of a lot of fun then, and I can't speak for what's going on today.
Okay. The book is called Growing Up Hollywood, Tales from the Son of a Hollywood Mogul. It's written by Rocky Lang. Rocky, I thank you very much for being on the program with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always great talking to you.
Rocky Lang, author of Growing Up Hollywood, Tales from the Son of a Hollywood Mogul. And by the way, Rocky also has another book out that is worth mentioning. It's called If You Thought Your Divorce Was Bad, Wait Until You Read This Book. And hopefully we'll have a chance in a few weeks to visit with Rocky again and talk about that book too. Sounds like a lot of fun. In the meantime, you can go to my website at thestuffile.com, go to the What's On page for this show, which is show number 0272, and you'll find the links to Rocky's website, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his book directly.
You've just heard an exclusive excerpt from the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder. To hear any or all of the full hour-long shows, visit thestufffile.com. Stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's thestufffile.com. A presentation of Flying Fish Communications.